thing I'm wondering about, just for Barb and Renee, when you guys were doing your presentation, you spoke about how privileged you were to have such a great board and to have your staff willing to take these things on and align. And Linda and I were sitting over there going, "You're not privileged. Nobody handed you that. You built that. You built that." And that's my question. Like, what does it take to build that? What did you have to resist to build that? What did you have to bring to build that?
Pain is an immense frustration. Is a real motivator for me. I'm sure it is for you too. And we had board of directors where there were a couple of them where we were constantly debating the fundamentals. The fundamentals of human rights, feminism, and trying to narrow the gap on privilege. And so what I decided was that I was going to hand-pick the board of directors. The first criteria, because we're so small, is that I did not want any of my friends on the board, because I was the only management out of the union, and I needed people that were going to check me. They were going to critique me. They were going to give me feedback. When I first came on as the executive director, the whole board of directors was all interested in programming. And to me, that was bloody useless. When I came on, they didn't know if they were going to make payroll. Like, I'm going, what the hell is going on? So I started hand-picking the board of directors. And I also have an interview now that they have to go through, and they have to literally sign on to the basics. We are pro-choice. We are anti-racism. We are all of these things that we're trying to, kind of narrow the gap. As I said earlier, we've got 2 lawyers on our board. One is human rights, has done a master's in law in human rights in England. The other one works for a private practice in Yukon. We have a man on our board who helps me because we own both of our buildings we own. And that happened because we have a board of directors that'll back us up, that will push government, that requires us to do that. We have a wicked finance person on our board of directors. We have a psychologist on our board who works in the education system. And we have an Aboriginal woman who is the EA to the largest of our 14 self-governing First Nations. She also worked in the transition field in Alberta. So that was the first thing we did, was start hand-picking our board of directors. When any of them, it's really interesting too, they last a long time. We've got people that have been on the board now for one 6 years, one probably going on 10. They stay. They don't want to leave because it's such a beautiful way of working. The next thing we did was we started, Renee and I started really strategically looking at the hiring and using response-based questions. And
like what?
Like
a woman sits beside you. She comes into the office, she sits beside you, and she says, "Why do I always pick these guys?" What was the second part? Why do I always pick these guys? Well, anyway,
What is it about me?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so they're required to, sometimes we even have like a dialogue with them back and forth about that, like you're the woman coming in. So we do a lot of those interview questions that are open-ended, so that, and they don't most of the time know our policies. We want to kind of get innately how they work. Renee does an amazing job. years ago, because it's a 24-hour facility, years ago I spent a lot of time in my bathroom on the phone,
Karen can attest to that.
you know, trying to debrief staff. And I'm so tactile that I would, you know, I'd be closing my eyes, sitting, you know, on the toilet or leaning back, like trying to get what the staff get, right? I'm like, this is fucking crazy. They're like, so how the hell do we start empowering people to be able to make really good, sound decisions? And so one of the things that Renee does is they're required to do the like hours of feminist and response-based analysis around where we stand as an organization and how we want to respond to people. So it's a required part of the training when staff come on.
The first couple of days they say, Renee doesn't think we're feminist enough, but then they, yeah.
We are constantly pushing back with government, and we're always on different. The environment's always different in that. There were a few people that asked if we could take practicum students, and you know, yes and no, depending on where we are at with that pushback of government, because sometimes it's really engulfing. And takes a lot of time, and so that when we're in negotiations like that with government, it's not a good time to take on a practicum student because we can't give them what they want. One of the most powerful things that we have done in our women's community is we got funding from government to have a women's coalition. So we've got the First Nations organizations in there, and all of the other women's groups are in there, and we refuse to compete for funding. We refuse. As a women's coalition, we decide who we think is up for a raise, and we go to government collectively. So the 3 transition houses go to government collectively. Lots of times they refuse to meet with us like that.
Wow.
And they will only meet with one of us. So we go in with the same bloody story.
How did you guys
And
come
we
to that
strategize.
solidarity?
Well,
How
we
did-
sit
how did you come to-
outside. We
I-
sit-
Not how you do it. How did you come to that? Because it is remarkable.
Yeah.
So how did you
How,
guys
how
get
did
to that?
how did we get to that?
Because
when
you're
you
set
start,
up in competition.
my family is First Nations. One is Métis, and one of my daughters is Métis, and one is Yukon First Nation, who's non-status. Her dad's status. And I started, you know, and the whole thing about missing and murdered Aboriginal, and where the hell did that money go? It went to police that nobody wants to talk to. It was taken out of the hands of the Aboriginal women who were doing such an amazing job at sitting down, having tea with elders and their family members, and finding out about these women who have been missing and murdered. So you know, it just kind of dawned on me at one point, going, the government chops us up into little compartments that we're supposed to stick in. We can't do this anymore. So we can't do this anymore. So in all of our funding that we have, pots of money, you know, crime prevention, blah, 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 the Women's Coalition decides who we are going to support in that. So it doesn't mean that the Liard Aboriginal Women's Society will put in a proposal, and we might too, but on the very first line we go, we will not take money unless the Liard Aboriginal Women's, this is the one that we deem the most important.
Mm-hmm.
If you're giving another pot of money, this is what we deem as second priority. So that's what we've been doing, and working on one of the cool things that we do in that group is we, if there's an issue come up, like, you know, government's moving to cut the funding for one of the women's organizations, we decide who's positioned the best to lead the fight on it, and then everybody else helps them. Because a lot of us are NGOs with government funding, we we sometimes aren't safe in our survival to head up the fight. So we decide who's positioned the best, and then everybody kind of feeds them.
If
How
I
about,
can just
how about
add
for
to
you,
that.
Angela?
Yeah, I was just
Absolutely.
going to say that
the things you've done to kind of
I think
build these spaces.
yeah, we're in a unique position as a peak body. So we're sort of the peak body who advocate and I guess try and take up that fight and argument to government so that refugees are not at risk. So for example, the round of funding was due again and we're going through what they call a procurement process, so everybody's got to resubmit. But what Premier and Cabinet within Treasury wanted to do was, well, they came to us with the idea and said, look, we want to put it out to open competitive tendering, which means any bastard out there, Serco, all these people can come in and tender for women's refuge services. And we said, hang on a minute, we've got specialist services, been running these services for 30 years and more. We're not, you know, we don't want to go there. Because at the moment they've had what's called preferred service provider status, okay? So we managed to get the government to agree to that and, you know, and not putting these services at risk because obviously they didn't want to go through all of that as well. So what we agreed to was do a series of workshops that we, I guess, directed in terms of helping services because we've also got some changes coming in. So how to help them to prepare their requests to government. So we did a series of 3 workshops and Regina, were you at some of those? Yeah. And I guess it was about putting that protection around the refuge services so we can take the hit but they're not going to get it, you know. And I think that's the beauty of having a peak body, you know, because, you know, they can sort of try and target, you know, a couple of people, a few people in a peak body, but they won't touch the refuges. So I think it's a beautiful place to be as a peak body, but also our constitution backs us up. We've got a really great constitution that says, you know, we have 10 women from these different positions that will sit on our, and they come from refuges, remote, rural, Aboriginal women, cold women. They must hold those seats. No men, it's not negotiable. We've had, you know, lots of people try and infiltrate. We are a political organisation as a peak body. We are an activist body and we will get involved in politics, in members of parliament. But again, as a peak body, you've got a unique position to be able to do that and try and advocate that in a way that's not going to put refugees at risk, but it's going to raise the profile, because I think there's been an attack on, you know, feminist organisations for far too long. Unfortunately, in the east part of the country, they went out to tender and they had, no offence, but church groups won and all the feminist groups lost their tenders. And we kept saying to government in our state, we don't want that happening here. We said to refugees, no way is that happening here. So we've managed to hold that ground, but it's a tenuous piece of movement because, you know, we're lucky we've got allies in government. We've got some really good people who've worked in our sector who are now in positions of policy and funding who get it, you know, and we align ourselves with those people who will also take up the fight within government. So I guess as a peak body we're quite unique and we're able to protect the refugees, but that's a great way to say who's in the best position and who can take up the fight at any given time that's not going to be at the greatest risk.
I think that is an answer to the question I was asking earlier about who are you centering? Are you being accountable to funders or the people you're trying to serve? And I think these are the practices of doing that. Did you want to say something in response to this?
No, well, no, it really works well. Like, I mean, the collaborative approach that Barb's talking about, that the Women's Coalition has, we've made huge strides when it comes to even how we advertise, how we campaign. It's just made such a collaborative approach that, And it's helped us bring in response-based to our practices into a lot of systems that are operating in the Yukon. Like, you know, the Women's Coalition, the RCMP, a lot of people are using these now because everybody's using the language, so they don't want to be left out, you know? When we're constantly saying sexualized violence, well, then the reporter is going to start saying it and inquiring about it and want to know why we are using these words, and they're going to be listening. And so when you have 20 people using that language, other people feel left out and want to participate and have come to the table and wanted to learn.
Did you want to speak a bit to what you did in your refuge to like make space for these kind of revolutionary practices we're calling like response-based practices?
Well, I guess it started when we met Alan Wade about 5 years ago, really, and we're really, you know, interested in the work he was doing with Kathy and Linda. So we brought the three of them to Perth, had a conference, and it was like, you know, a beacon going on. It was like, yes, this is the micro level of analysis of language that was needed. I mean, it's sort of like you're stumbling along, but you sort of go, ha, this is what we need to be saying and doing, and you know, analysing transcripts and doing a whole lot of other stuff. Because when we respond to media, you need to be really careful about the language that you're using and pull them up on stuff like sex with a child, and you know, that it's a woman's fault that she was out in the park, or you know, because she was dressed like that, you know, she somehow deserved to be raped. So you know, it sort of was like something that just took momentum, and we thought this is an ongoing conversation, and so that's why we're really keen to keep that sort of relationship going, because now we've got, you know, people in government going, oh yeah, you know, this is what we need to be sort of, it's about responses, it's not about, you know, saying, you know, so we can now start to challenge things like mother blaming a lot better. We can now start to challenge things about, well, failure to protect. So what are you going to do to help a woman? Are you going to take her children away? Is that a really good response to a woman who's, you know, lived with a violent partner for so many years? How does that make sense? You know, so we can start to have those conversations a lot better. And they are now looking at that and going, yeah, maybe we need to be looking at, you know, the mother-child bond and strengthening that, and sort of providing more support around the woman and her children. And let's focus on perpetrator accountability, because in the conversation that was missing. You know, it was all about, you're the primary caregiver as a woman, you're the one who's incapable, not competent, therefore your children need to be taken into care. So a lot of things are shifting, and so, you know, we really want to maintain that sort of, approach.
The Yukon government is approached me not too long ago. Alan started coming up, Alan and Linda and Kathy started coming up to Yukon in, what, 1998?
Yeah.
With the Liard Aboriginal Women's Council?
As camp cooks.
As camp cooks. Kathy couldn't, or Anne couldn't find any funding to bring Alan up. So the only thing that she could find to get money for was to have a land-based feast. So he came up as a camp cook.
It was Alan and Robin Rutledge.
Right, in that, on that one, yeah. Yes. For many, many years, our government blocked these ideas because many of their careers had decades of being based on that the problem around violence was in women's heads and all about the brain, and so decades of careers were based on a lot of those beliefs, and they had really strong beliefs that they were the helpers that were going to help the esteem of women so that we could, you know, stop violence. And that was a really prominent thought that they fought for a long time, and now things have shifted. So government just approached me not too long ago and said, do you and Renee have the capacity to start training response-based practice through every level of government in every department? And I said, Yeah, no. I said some of the other people need to do the basics. You're not going to get the training like they can do it. And then once that's done, then Renee and I will work on what does this look like then when you're interviewing staff, when you're having staff meetings, when you're debriefing your staff, when you're doing supervision, when you're doing discipline, when you're doing evaluations with your staff, when you're responding to funders. So just that whole piece of structure, Renee and I would do. And so
we might become government workers for a little while. No, I'm just kidding.
But so that's amazing. And what do you think it is that promoted that shift? It wasn't just a change in climate. Like, what did you do?
We have, Renee and I have been in Yukon for a long time, and we seek out allies that are in government. And with policing too. We seek out those people that are in those positions that can forward things. And then when something happens, so it's kind of, I was talking to Linda about this, it's kind of like being a major opportunist. So you got these ideas going, right? You're cooking it. Your allies in government are pushing the ceiling, and then something happens that the door opens a crack.
All of a sudden we make it look really cool.
And you're just there with the proposal, right? That's kind of how we shift government.
Starts with one person in that department, one person in that department, and yeah.
And you may not get it the first time round.
Yeah.
So we've had things on the table for 10
10
years
years
that then get up because they're now talking about homelessness and going, holy shit, there's nowhere to put women and children.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden the idea of safe at home started to appeal to people because it was economically viable to keep take a perpetrator out of a home potentially and keep the women and her 4 or 5 children in the home because waiting lists were 2 and 3 years for priority housing. So that all started to appeal, and so you wait for those opportunities and you go, okay, we got it this time round, and they've funded it for the last 3 years and they're just about to fund it for another 2 years. So it is about sometimes waiting, as you say, the right opportunity, but it may not come when we really want it, but we won't let it go either.
Yeah, like Barb says, like we started this work, Alan started coming over 18 years ago. So, it's about being patient, taking time, and building the army.
I guess the other thing I'm wondering about is in terms of like the collective ethics behind this. What is it that attracted you to this? What is it you've got or you bring from your own life that makes this a fit, that makes you the folk? Like, how are you resourced to actually, what you're doing is pretty remarkable. And it's not just that these are good ideas. Everybody knows about good ideas. There's something the three of you are doing that's moving these things forward. What is that?
I had so many teachers. I think, my family of origin is English, and they were really wealthy landowners. They owned a lot of Kelowna. Who's from that area? There's a Powick Road. My family owned all that beautiful golf course. And they they were highly conservative, right-wing conservative, and they were one of the last to give up slavery.
Well, this explains
Because
it.
it worked for them.
I just said that explains it.
And then I have an Indigenous daughter who at 14, I can't remember what we were talking about it, but at 14 I'm walking down the street in Main Street in Whitehorse, and I can't remember what we were talking about, but she turns around and goes, oh yeah, you think so? And she says, stand there, I want you to watch this. So the white credit card is sitting outside a store as I watch my teenage Aboriginal daughter walk in the store. And what I saw just incredibly changed me.
The security guys were in the car.
Well, I mean, how the store owner approached an Aboriginal teenager without the white credit card next to her
Oh,
was
okay.
shocking. The other thing that really changed me is I lived in the East End of Vancouver and was there when Leonard Peltier was taken out of Vancouver. And when we hung out that day and congregated at the post office downtown, I looked up and there were snipers with rifles and scopes. I was 14 at the time, and we knew that we got stopped 6 times a day and thrown up against the cop car. So after that, we just started running and going. And so that was I mean, the most brilliant education that I ever could have.
Everybody won't know who Leonard Peltier is.
Leonard Peltier was one of the leaders in AIM, the American Indian Movement, and him and John Graham were both jailed for their leadership in trying to liberate Aboriginal people both in the States and in Canada.
They were deported.
Yeah.
Extradited.
Extradited.
And Leonard, in jail, people tried to interview him many times, and they didn't get him a dentist. So he's got to the point where he has difficulty even opening his mouth because his teeth have decayed, and they haven't got him a dentist.
So that involvement you had with AIM, with the American Indian Movement, that kind of direct action activism, in some way you can thread that to the work that you're doing now, for sure.
Yeah.
It's fabulous.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about for you? What do you think?
Well, I guess it started as a child. I mean, we say we always thank our parents, but when we talk about white supremacy, my father was probably one example of that. You know, a German man who used to run around the house saying "Hi Hitler," and at that point I didn't know what it meant, but all I knew that it gave me shivers down the back of my spine. And of course, you know, my mother lived through a lot of shit basically with him. You know, he was an army man. He thank God he was away quite a lot, but when he did come home, it was hell on wheels, all right. We had to bloody stand to attention. So it was like you learn, you know, how to stand to attention at ease. You know, all this crap would go on. And of course, talk about control, power and control, you know. And then, I mean, you got to laugh a little bit because, you know, he was just ill-informed and bloody, you know. Thank God he has moved along, I think, or he's learned to shut his mouth, one of the two. So that was an experience, you know. And then I guess when I was 14, one of my young friends came up to me and said, oh, you know, one of the teachers is wanting me to go down the river with him and swim in the river. And she says, I don't feel comfortable about this. She says, I don't really want to go, but I don't know what to say, you know. Can you help me? Or, you know, and I thought then, yeah, bloody oath, this bastard's, you know, up to no good. Anyway, I went out to the school oval, you know, because back in those days, because I was sort of what you call a mixed breed, you know, my mother was Armenian and my father was German descent. Us mob would hang out, all the sort of Greeks and Italians and Aboriginal people. So, and we were part of a group called the Rockers. So you'd wear these skin-tight jeans and ripple-sole boots, and you're all tough, you know. Bloody hell, we were taking on the world, you know. And so I strut out on the oval. I see Mr. Bloody Meshingberg, you know. And I said, and I just came out, you know, the fire in the belly was there. I said, you bastard, you know, she's not going down to the river with you. And he said, you fucking lesbian. And at that point I went, I didn't know what to say. And I said, well, you're a poofter. You know, I learned not to do that. But that was immediate response. I thought, you bastard.
Yeah.
So marched into the headmistress's office. We used to call her Itchy Dick, actually. She'd run around scratching her crutch. So we never really knew what was going on. Did she have a dose of crabs or what? You know, but anyway, she looked like a skunk. She had this blade just through her hair. It was comical. Anyway, she said to me, she said, oh, look, she said, you know, what happened there was wrong, you know, and she said, we'll just have to call it a personality clash, she said. And in those days, you didn't know how to argue otherwise. And I guess they said, well, we've got to suspend you unofficially. And that means a letter goes home to your parents telling them what happened, blah, blah, blah. Well, this is how you learn to be subversive, you know. So I intercepted the letter before Mum got it out the mailbox. And so for 3 days I ran around and hung out with my mates, you know, and they were none the wiser that my parents didn't know. And, you know, unofficially suspended, I can live with that. So those sorts of experience, I guess, learned to challenge, to sort of question. And then, of course, the time in South Africa, well, God, I could go on, we haven't got enough time for that. But, you know, amazing experience about how to overcome, you know, domination and oppression and fight for your liberation. And, you know, you've got a white majority trying, you've got a white minority trying to, you know, bloody hand it over. And they just rose up. And what we learnt, you know, was incredible, just being in the presence of many people from the ANC, and
Yeah.
it's amazing.
I also like your story, how imperfect it is, you know, so you use a homophobic comment to battle at
Yes.
someone who's used a
Yes.
homophobic, and how that gets, and then later it's like, okay, it doesn't, you've got to put things
Yeah.
in their time.
Yeah.
But that's amazing. How about you, Renee? What do you, that you're willing to share with us? Or, in terms of these ethics and practices, what it takes for you to move them forward?
I think I knew at a young age that I was going to spend most of my career working on violence against women, and I think it comes from a father who challenged all, you know, social norms, oppression. He went to residential school, and he would always talk about beating the priests at hockey, and the only finding ways to, you know, hurt them, and protecting his brother, and, you know, so those were the things that he brought to my life. And I think that, yeah, he was an activist and taught me to be an activist. And I was writing papers, and I was in grade 7, writing papers on violence against women, like doing research on. So I knew at an early age that violence against women was where I'd land. And it, you know, and I think it's thanks to him. He used to always call himself a feminist too. So, yeah.
You have something that you want to actually share with everybody? It might be
Yeah,
a good time to
is
do
it a
that.
good time?
I
Well,
think, unless someone else has something to say.
yeah, I just wanted to say one little thing
Yeah.
that Barb talked about how we integrated it into, like, a little bit about KOTs and the phone calls in the bathroom, and I just wanted to say that we don't get those phone calls anymore. She doesn't get them at all anymore. There might be a phone call a week, and it's needed. People are once we've integrated response-based at the level of debriefing with staff or staff supervision, there are a lot less needs for us to be supervising at that level. There's a lot more decision making and trust in decision making that has happened. And so I wanted to say that too. And then I wanted to show you some of the great campaigns that we've been doing in the Yukon. One of them is approximately 5 years old. And this one, most of the ones I'm showing you are for Sexual Assault Prevention Month. And these are the Women Coalition members working together on them. And so this one is, it needs to get turned on. Are you asleep? So this is the one that we just recently did, and so I'm gonna put them up, I think. Is that okay? Like maybe we'll find some tape.
hold them too.
But so this is May. So a couple days ago, this is the campaign that we launched, and it says, "Drinking doesn't cause rape. Rapists do. Stop blaming victims. Call it what it is." One says, this comes from Alberta's "Don't Be That Guy." Just because she's drunk doesn't mean she wants to fuck. Without consent, it's not sex, it's rape. Call it what it is. And the third one is, do you know that alcohol is the most commonly used date rape drug? When someone is drunk, they can't legally give consent. Drinking is not a crime, rape is, and call it what it is. So this is a theme of call it what it is. So we also do 12 days to end violence before Christmas, and this is a continuation of call it what it is. And I didn't bring a copy of those ones.